Thank you again for joining us for the Road to Autonomous mini-series. In today's episode, we're going to talk about mapping and surveying. Again, Mark and Atticus are with me to discuss the topic. And Atticus, I'd like to start with you. Why do you think, mapping and surveying is such a sensitive issue in China?
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, surveying and mapping, why is sensitive? Because that mapping and surveying is a highly regulated area, and also the complex thing is also relates to state secrets. So a lot of issues bounded together. For example, certain area that's restricted and certain is completely prohibited from foreign investment and for entries perspective. For example, restricted areas. Internet mapping service that can be done, by joint venture. Certain surveying and mapping activities can also be done by joint venture, and also information services and storage and forwarding services. Those are VAS license, regulated from telecom perspective. But for certain services or activities, for example, making electronic navigation maps and also ground moving survey, those activities are completely prohibited by the government because of the survey restrictions and also state secrets.
So Atticus, I got a question there, maybe for people watching. So what's the difference between, say, an internet mapping service or surveying and mapping and making an electronic navigation map or a ground moving survey? How are these things different, and what kind of licenses do you need? Like, what kind of VATS licenses do you need, depending on those different types of activities?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, for internet mapping service, this from our we have the experience that when we walk from in a city, that we select a mapping service and we select where we are and the destiny, and then we choose a mapping service, and they just use the map provided by the other suppliers. They just provide this service to you. So this type of license. And survey and mapping is a broad concept. And in addition to doing the map, there are also for example the land survey and also the river, those all the survey and mapping. And some of this area is not so sensitive and can be done by a joint venture. But for making of electronic navigation maps, because this they need to use GPS, those data, and also they need to use the LiDAR. And they survey the area of the surface of the the city or the bridge or tunnel. So that's very sensitive, and this is prohibited from invested by foreign investments.
And just so so I guess just to make it easier for people to understand, because I think in most countries maps are not as off limits as in China. I think if you go on Google Maps around the world, you can see the White House, you can see all kinds of things quite close up. So what are the like the restrictions are of a certain level, like what high level? I mean, because a lot with autonomous cars, you really need to have the sensors tell not how the next 2 miles looks, but rather the next 1 or 2 meters. And is that somehow restricted, that kind of dynamic movement on a map, like at a micro level rather than at a road level or a city level?
Yeah, I think that's the issues to be resolved by the government, because based on the current regulations, those dynamic mapping a map, the updates of those road situation, actual situation is kind of fall within the scope of surveying and mapping. But this does not, meet the needs of autonomous driving. And so currently the government is considering, relaxing the regulation in this area. But still, they are thinking about the ways how to do that, how to lose the regulation.
Who are the main players in the government dealing with these mapping issues? Which authorities are the main ones?
Yeah, that's the Natural Resources Department.
Right. Okay.
Thanks, Atticus. And I think one of the topics that you touched upon, Mark, was the fact that it's not so much the act, but it's more about the information that is the problem. And this kind of rolls into the whole state secrets issue here. Would you mind giving us a little bit of explanation on what state secrets are?
Yeah, sure. So I think state secrets are, I mean, firstly, it's something which most of us will not come across in our lives, and we're very happy that we don't come across it. So, state secrets is information which they consider to be, an important piece of information. And I think what is, curious is there's limited cases of this, but, one famous case was where a multinational company had equipped GPS tracking devices on its trucks, which were going around Yunnan province. And this collection of data, and this is quite a while ago, this was considered to be a state secret, where things were moving. And then perhaps the most famous one was with Rio Tinto. There was a case about that. And so, state secrets, I think, it does have a broad definition, and it will really depend on the authority. And so I think, anybody who's collecting information, for mining companies, it was a bit of a surprise. It could be even surveying reports and things like that. And that's where a lot of us think about state secrets, is in the natural resource area. But I think going forward for autonomous cars, state secrets can be quite complex, because the car will be a bit like an Internet of Things device, and it will be collecting data and information. And a lot of the data and information which it will collect will be sensitive. It will be saying, that Atticus is driving from here to there. It might be, able to work out that there's 1 million people moving to some, event or something. And so there's a lot of information which is, sensitive, which is being collected. And so I think, one of the issues will be, even if you purchase information like data, if you acquire data from a Chinese vendor, there was another case a few years ago where that person went to jail for buying data from a state-owned enterprise. So, it's a bit of a risky area, because you don't always know. It's a bit like a tsunami. It comes out of nowhere, but if it hits you, boy, there's nowhere to run. So state secrets, I think, is really important. If you are collecting state secrets or information that may fall within it, you have to make sure that you're getting it from the right source, and also how you deal and process that information is important. So, safe and secure technologies, often depending on the type of state secret, it can't be connected to a network. The people who handle the information have to be registered. They can't just leave the country easily. So I don't want to make it like it's something which is a big issue, but anybody dealing with data relating to mapping, etc., should look at this and work out, am I at risk, and how can I minimize or defang the risk by, getting a Chinese vendor? So I don't know, Atticus, do you have any other additional points on state secrets?
Yeah, I think, Mark, you're right. That's, this is a very sensitive area. And, when we advise client, we also, give them the advice that, they should take this very seriously, and, ensure that they do this correctly.
Yeah. And so I think that means that'll normally be, working out if it is an issue, work out the data, work out what information has to remain in the data, how personalized it is. And then, in certain cases, you may need to get a Chinese, maybe a state-owned enterprise with the right licenses to process the data for you. I think that will be the key problem for most Western technology companies.
And I think one of the key issues here that you touched upon on the state secrets, but also in the first slide, Mark, is that there was that restricted and prohibited second half of that line that we had on the screen earlier, and partnering up with Chinese entities might serve as a way to de-risk some of the situation. But let's just go over a little bit of the options for market entry here. So we have a couple options. Would you like to run this over for us?
Yeah, I'll go through it quick, because I think many people will be very familiar with it. So I mean, a WOFE, which is a wholly foreign-owned enterprise, Yeah, so that's where a foreign company will set up a 100% owned subsidiary in China. And so I think for many tech companies, this is still, for most tech companies, the most comfortable solution, because they have control of their destiny. They feel that there's no risk of a conflict with a joint venture partner because you don't have a joint venture partner. People feel that the technology is probably better safeguarded. And I think it's very popular with medium-sized companies. Joint ventures is, I think it's less common, but it's becoming more common again with technology, especially given the difficulties we have between the US and China on the technology front. I think people are now looking to license technology, even though that's often also caught by overseas legislation. But the idea is that China is too big to ignore, but also a bit too big to handle easily. And so we see a lot of tech companies now look to do joint ventures with successful, strong Chinese tech companies. And it may be that the tech will evolve in a different way. And I think, as Atticus mentioned in the opening slide, there are certain types of sectors where joint ventures are possible, but WOFIs are not possible. So that would be a gating issue. And then I think, M&A is less common. You do see it sometimes, but you have to be very careful. The main issue in this kind of mapping and surveying would be that somebody has identified a Chinese entity that holds the operational license which they wish to have. And in that case, the M&A, if you can continue to hold the license, would be really a big jump forward, because it would solve a lot of your problems. Because even if you have the establishment of the entity, obtaining the operational license always brings with it in China some risk as to timing. Even in the best case, the timing will never be accurate. Okay, so 3 months becomes 9 months, and in some cases, if you just have a law firm that looks at the black and white law, there are certain types of laws that say you can obtain this license if you're in the free trade zone, but they've never actually issued them in practice. So I think the M&A, it's very interesting if you've identified a company with the right license, but you have to be very careful that whatever you do when you acquire it doesn't damage the operational license, because in most cases, that's the only reason you're doing the M&A for this kind of new tech startup area in mapping. And then just finally, on the contractual or VIE, so contractual is quite simple. It would be if you have a wholly foreign-owned enterprise or a joint venture, and there is a piece of work that you cannot do, you have a contractual cooperation with a Chinese entity that can do it. And that can be a little bit complicated, but almost always you can find a solution if you're creative enough. The VIE, we do have elsewhere on the channel an explanation about how a VIE works, but basically a VIE is a captive company owned by domestic people or entity in China that you control via contracts. And because it's domestically owned, it is more easily able to get operational licenses which are restricted to foreign investment. There are questions about enforceability, and it's a bit of a gray area. I would argue VIEs in practice tend to have less problems than joint ventures, but that's really a commercial discussion. But I think on the VIE, it might be interesting for Atticus to tell us a little bit about his experience with these licenses, because like he mentioned at the start, some licenses can be done by WOFIs, some by joint ventures, and some by hardly anybody whatsoever. So Atticus, could you maybe tell us a bit about where the VIE could fit in with mapping and surveying in China?
Yeah, sure. As Mark mentioned, that VIE, is used in certain area because the Chinese government, the law is not very clear on that. But for mapping and surveying industry, I think VIE is not commonly seen structured, because this area is too sensitive. Perhaps that invest in telecom industry and also education industry, VIE structure is more often used. In the mapping and the surveying industry, for the restricted area, we have seen that some kind of VIE structure there, but for the prohibited area industry, it's very rare to see that a VIE structure is used in China.
Because there is that license, the most tightly held. There's like about 20 of them, I think. I can't remember, but like those licenses, many companies would like to get those licenses. So VIEs are typically the Chinese employees, or it's somebody's uncle. But I think on these mapping licenses in China, this is not just for everybody. It has to be the right kind of company. Is that right? So Atticus, maybe tell us a bit about that. The golden license, or the golden ticket license, I think they refer to it. Maybe just tell everybody a bit about that license.
Yes, that's the license that we mentioned earlier. That is called electric navigation license. So that's the will create the map basically, and the HD map will be treated as one of these type of maps. This license is very difficult to obtain. About 20 years, there's only 14 or 15 companies that get this license. And in recent years, Chinese government has relaxed the threshold of the actually lose the threshold and the requirement in application for this license. And in the past 2 years, there are about 8 or 9 companies that get the new license. And so far, there's 24 companies that get this Class A mapping license. So it's very, very rare in the market, and so they call it the golden license. But as mentioned, that the Chinese government also wants to lose the regulation in this area to cope with the development of the autonomous driving technology. So currently there's a draft regulation in place, and basically it's planned to overhaul the application threshold of these companies to apply for this license, and it will classify Class A and Class B, so make it a company to apply for this easier. But still, this license will be difficult to obtain, as rather than other telco license that maybe get by many companies. But in this area, maybe just only a head of companies can get this license.
But will the relaxation also apply to foreign invested companies, or it's just going to be easier for Chinese companies to apply for it?
Currently, it's still a prohibited area for foreign investment companies, so it's easier for a Chinese company to apply for.
But the new draft doesn't make it easier for foreign companies either. So the new draft regulation and that movement with the overhauling, it's still going to be a Chinese monopoly. It's not going to have foreign invested companies being able to apply for it.
Yeah, for this license, it's because it's prohibited for foreign investment, so it just cannot be applied for by the foreign investment companies. But there, as mentioned, there's also certain license from a Serbian mapping perspective. Certain areas can be done by a joint venture, so that's also can be get easier to the joint venture to obtain this license.
Yeah, and I guess if you've got a part of the activity which falls within the golden license, you've got 24 different companies you could cooperate with, because then you just can't do it, but you could cooperate with them. They would be your contractor or subcontractor.
Yes, currently, those OEMs and autonomous driving technology companies, the way that they work with, they handle this, mapping thing is work with a license mapping from among those 24 license holder.
And I believe this slide, Mark, is more so not necessarily the licensing perspective, but more so from a commercial perspective and what options you can consider in making your China market entry.
Yeah. So I think, basically, this is kind of a flow chart that we've got a more complex one we can share with anybody who's interested. But just, basically, can you operate as a woofie? Yes or no? If yes, is it practically possible? Or you might want to try and do a licensing business model. And, then you could do a woofie. If it's not practically possible, you're going to have to look at VIE or other cooperation. And then I think, so here again, we're just talking about the kind of flow charts. And so for all of these licenses, like Atticus mentioned, joint ventures can obtain them, but be very careful, all because it says you can obtain it, whether you can. And, there's quite a lot of thresholds, like registered capital. It really depends how many different VATS licenses you need and whether you want to roll out nationwide or provincial. So there's quite a lot to know to plan this out. And then you could look for a suitable partner, and there could be some kind of licensing arrangement or a VIE model. So I don't think this slide should just really explain everything for all time, but it's more just some of the questions. And as I mentioned, if somebody's interested, we can send them a much more detailed, flow chart about the decision-making tree.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark. I think the issue here is that there are strategic approaches to how to enter the China market, but also take into account the vehicle, but also you need to take into account the types of licenses and the practicality of obtaining those licenses as well, which, like you said, if you do have questions about that that's a very specific question. So if you do have any issues with that, you can feel free to reach out to Mark and Atticus. Their emails are on the screen here, and they can speak a little bit more directly to your specific situation. With that said, this is a very big topic in the mapping and surveying sector. So we don't expect to cover everything, but please feel free to reach out to Mark and Atticus to get more information. Thank you for watching.